Republican side to witness it. And because that election is so close and because the president's lead is declining, that is where we could lose it. And it is an outrage that those people are in contempt of court. And meanwhile, we're waiting for the United States Supreme Court, of which the president has nominated 3 justices to step in and do something. And hopefully Amy Coney Barrett will come through and pick it up. There's no guarantee of that, Lou. So we have to fight this on the ground and make sure that we challenge in every place and we are.
Hopefully, Amy Coney Barrett will come through. Of course, the Supreme Court doesn't step in, Amy Coney Barrett or any of them, and do much of anything. They do not tip the scales for Donald Trump because Donald Trump lost. But Dillon remained a loyal, legal foot soldier and spokesperson as Trump tried and failed to overturn the election and lost case after case after case, up to 60 of them. Here's how Mark Elias's democracy docket describes what she has done since then, since the 2020 election. Quote, Dillon and her namesake law firm she founded in '06 has become one of the leading legal groups working to roll back voting rights across the country. In the past few years, Dillon, or an attorney from her law firm, has been involved in at least 16 different lawsuits in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Maine, Michigan, North Carolina, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., challenging voting rights laws, redistricting, election processes, or Trump's efforts to appear on the ballot in the 2024 election. In a statement, Dillon says that she is, quote, honored by President Trump's nomination to assist with our nation's civil rights agenda, but many experts see it quite differently. Mark Elias warns that with Dillon at the head of DOJ's Civil Rights Division, quote, DOJ will be on the side of vote suppressors and election deniers, an early and important indicator of what the next chapter of the fight for voting rights will look like in the United States. With Trump's latest DOJ appointment is where we start today. The aforementioned Mark Elias is here, voting rights attorney and founder of the site Democracy Docket. Also joining us, MSNBC legal analyst and NYU law professor Melissa Murray. Mark, first, just take one step back and remind us what is in the purview of the head of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice.
Yeah, so it's a big job, and it covers, as you point out, the enforcement of the nation's civil rights laws involving discrimination, policing, lots and lots of things. But the thing that I am mostly focused on, or the thing that immediately jumped off the page for me, is that voting rights falls within this purview. And that jumps off the page because Harmeet Dillon ran for chair of the RNC against Ronna McDaniel on a platform of voter suppression, what she calls election integrity, complaining that the Republican Party was not doing enough after 2020 to put partisan poll watchers at the polls, was not doing enough to fight against vote by mail and other forms of voting, was not doing enough to fight against civil rights and voting rights organizations in court. And the idea that she is now going to be put in charge of the Civil Rights Division and oversee the voting rights section at a time when you have the election denier in chief in the Oval Office, at a time when Project 2025 wants to dismantle voting rights around the country, at a time when, frankly, the courts and voting rights are one of the few places we have to fight to ensure free and fair elections in the future, is beyond absurd. It is something out of Kafka novel.
Can you explain, too, DOJ's role in defending legislation that is suppressive or that would infringe on anyone's voting rights? DOJ normally is the body, those lawyers, the lawyers who work in the Civil Rights Division, defend those cases. What happens to those cases, Mark?
Yeah, so this is my great fear, and it's the reason why I sent that message, by the way, on Blue Sky, not on X. I'm getting off X, but Blue Sky. I recommend it to everyone. The fear that I have is that the Department of Justice, one of their missions in these cases is to ensure that the nation's voting laws are upheld. And that's both the Voting Rights Act, but it's also a number of other very, very important voting laws. They are the chief cop on the beat to ensure that people's right to vote is not infringed upon. And, you know, look, Nicolle, over the last few years, you and I have had a number of back and forth about whether or not Merrick Garland was doing enough in this area. And I think, you know, many people thought he and the department could could have done more. But they are in a number of cases where my fear is that on January 20th at noon, the position of the United States will flip. It will flip from a position of protecting black voters from discrimination under the Voting Rights Act into one that seeks to gut the last provisions of the Voting Rights Act. It will flip on laws like the Help America Vote Act. It will flip on laws like the provisions that prevent discrimination against our military and overseas voters into positions that are antithetical to those interests. And this is not hypothetical, by the way. It is the Republican National Committee itself that is oftentimes trying to gut these very laws and trying to urge courts to adopt positions that would restrict voting rights. And I fear that the fact that the Department of Justice is in some of these cases will give an on-ramp. I'd much rather the Department of Justice dismiss their cases, take themselves out of interventions that they're in, so that at least Harmeet Dillon is going to have to find lawyers at DOJ to file pleadings to get into cases, and will face some speed bumps.
And just finish the thought, what does she do if DOJ, if Merrick Garland doesn't heed your warning? These cases are open. She wants to do, as you say, flip sides. Then what would happen?
Well, look, then you're putting folks like my clients and my law firm and many, many other civil rights organizations in the position of now having to fight not just the state vote suppressors, not just the Republican Party and their allies who are, election deniers, but now we are also fighting the tax-funded Department of Justice, who will be advancing positions, like I said, antithetical to their core mission, which is ensuring the right to vote. It is both a drain on resources. It is also going to cause a lot of confusion, I think, among judges, although hopefully they will see through it. Some of the judges may play confused about what the Department of Justice is doing.
I mean, Melissa, it is as dramatic a shift for the role of the person inside the government who is supposed to or has previously done one thing and would now do another, as Kennedy at HHS or Tulsi Gabbard at DNI or Kash Patel at FBI. I mean, it is as dramatic a departure from a norm. Nothing illegal about it. Elections have consequences. This is one of them. But it is as dramatic a shift in a single post as anything we've reported on since November 5th.
I certainly think that's correct, Nicolle. Obviously, when there's a change in administration, there's a change in administration priorities, and often civil rights is where that is most keenly felt. But just to add a little gloss on what Mark has said, there's currently pending in the lower federal courts a challenge to whether private parties can bring suits under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Section 2 is basically the last leg standing of the Voting Rights Act to challenge suppressive voter laws. And we've relied a lot on what's known as private attorneys generals, people like Mark, private groups to challenge suppressive voter laws when they come up. And that's especially important in circumstances where the administration may not necessarily be as aggressive in enforcing voting rights. And in a situation like this one, where it seems clear that the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Justice is not just abstaining, but may actively be undermining voting rights, the fact of Section 2 is even more important. So we have this case that's currently percolating. It's likely to go to the Supreme Court. I think it's likely to find a very receptive home at the Supreme Court, and it may knock out Section 2 and the prospect of private parties suing, which will leave everything to the Department of Justice. And that will be a really difficult road to hoe if Harmeet Dillon is the head of the Civil Rights Division. That leaves nothing to say about the fact of just ordinary DEI efforts and police brutality consent decrees and the other things that the office does on a regular basis. The fact that she has been nominated to fill this post makes clear that this administration is going to really pursue its priorities in reorienting our understanding of civil rights such that we're no longer focused on those traditional minority groups that historically have been excluded, but now we're really focused on a new set of minorities, aggrieved, outspoken conservatives, aggrieved Christian evangelicals, those who believe that the quote unquote woke mob are imposing certain things on them and they need government to step in and protect them. And this is the administration to do that.
Let me show you Harmeet Dillon in her own words, ticking through some of those priorities. Melissa.
You cannot advance without parroting every woke message that has come along over the years. You get a tax deduction for corrupting an election by using a nonprofit organization.
Which is a clear abuse.
We had the government telling all the social media companies what Americans could see. That affected the outcome of elections, many elections, not just the 2020 election. This January 6th committee, as we all know, has been going on for a year and a half, and I would call it an extended advertisement with no actual legal significance, but all political by the January 6th committee and the Democrats.
So again, Melissa, don't believe us. There she is in her own words. I think that was RFK Jr.'s one-time running mate there, and the bleeped out words starts with a B and ends with it. But this is a worldview that is, I guess, pretty common inside the Trump coalition, but has never ascended to this particular post before in either party by design.
No, that's right. I mean, to be clear, I think we've seen inklings of it at the United States Supreme Court, certainly among some of the justices, if not the entire 6-3 conservative supermajority. We've seen it in cases like 303 Creative, which essentially gave Christian evangelicals a license to discriminate on the ground that standard public accommodations law that require business owners to serve all comers are basically a form of compelled speech, and religious individuals have an opportunity to be exempt from that. So we've seen inklings of it. I think we're going to see the wholesale pushing of this as an administration priority. It was laid out in Project 2025, but it shouldn't surprise us that this is what they are doing. They told us they were going to do this, and she is the perfect vessel for this.
Mark Elias, I want to share a little bit more of her past client work. This is from Time Magazine. She worked for Kari Lake. This is from 2022. Quote, last week, the Lake campaign hired Harmeet Dillon, one of Trump's lead attorneys who contested the 2020 election, to run its election day operations. In an interview with Time on Tuesday, Dillon tied the voting equipment problems to the role of Hobbs' office in testing and certifying the machines. Quote, it says to me that the Arizona Secretary of State is grossly incompetent and should not have been charged with this election, Dillon said, and that's why she should not be holding any elected office here in Arizona. The issue of fraud in Arizona was resolved by the Republican governor, by Republican office holders up and down the ballot, and by Trump's own independent audit, the Ninja Turtles or something. I mean, there was no fraud that led to any of Kari Lake. She's now had multiple defeats. What does it signal that someone who doesn't believe in the integrity of our elections is now in charge of the Civil Rights Division?
Look, I think that the fact is that Donald Trump has had one irreducible minimum for anyone he appoints to his administration, and that is that they are an election denier. You know, there was a New York Times story that said that people who are applying to be in his administration are being asked whether they believe that the 2020 election was fairly decided and what their opinion on January 6th is. And the New York Times says that the people being asked these questions believe there's only one right answer. Well, of course, there's only one right answer. And the only right answer in Donald Trump's administration is the election denier answer. And Kari Lake is an election denier. About her own elections, about other people's elections. Harmeet Dillon represents a lot of people who are election deniers. She ran for the platform. She ran for the chair of the RNC on a platform of voter suppression. And the idea that she's now going to be in charge of the part of the Department of Justice that oversees